Chapter 1. The Council's Mandate. The stench of decay hung thick in the damp air of Skavenblight. Rotting timber groaned underfoot, and the distant screeches of tortured warbeasts echoed through the labyrinthine tunnels. In the heart of Clan Moulder's sprawling breeding pits, where abominations writhed in their cages, Skritch Quickfang stalked toward the central council chamber. His claws twitched involuntarily, his veins itching for another dose of warpstone to quell the trembling weakness in his limbs. The summons had come abruptly, a pack of snarling gutter runners dragging him from his den and muttering half-squeaks about the council's displeasure. Skritch sneered at the memory. Displeased? When were the Lords of Decay ever not displeased? As he approached the grand, fungus-lit chamber, two hulking rat-ogres barred his way, their slavering jaws held in check by thick iron muzzles. With a hiss and a gesture from their handler, the brutes lumbered aside, allowing Skritch to enter. Inside, the warlord council of Clan Moulder awaited him, their bloated forms seated atop thrones of bone and metal. Shadows from the flickering warpstone braziers danced across the grotesque visages of his masters. The air thrummed with barely suppressed menace. "Skritch Quickfang," croaked Warlord Throsfang Maw, his voice a wheezing growl. "You are summoned here not to grovel, whine, no, but to serve. Serve, yes, yes." Skritch bowed low, though his teeth clenched in frustration. He knew better than to show anything but complete subservience. "Great masters, I live, serve, to obey your will. Yes, yes." His words spilled out quickly, a sycophantic staccato. "Command me, and it shall be done, no matter cost, price." The council exchanged glances, their eyes gleaming with malice. Another of the lords, a corpulent figure clad in patchwork armor and draped in furs, leaned forward. "Far-flung lands. Grand Cathay lies beyond the dark lands, yes, yes, full of strange beasts, creatures ripe for capture. You go, Skritch Quickfang, with army horde to bring back." A murmur rippled through the room. Cathay? The land of the East, where even the council's long claws had only scraped the surface? Skritch suppressed a shudder. The journey alone would be deadly, a perilous trek across the Empire's surface, through the World's Edge Mountains and into the unknown dangers of the Darklands. The idea of leading such an expedition was madness. "Me? Yes, yes, I am honored by your great wisdom, cleverness," Skritch lied, his voice trembling only slightly. "But why? Why choose poor Skritch for this glorious task mission?" Warlord Thras bared yellowed fangs, his grin both mocking and threatening. "Because you are expendable, Skritch Quickfang. A warpstone-addict, yes, yes, always needing more. He leaned closer, his voice a hiss. "Bring us beasts, monstrosities, warp spawn, or do not come back at all." Skritch's heart raced, half from fear, half from anticipation. If he succeeded, he could demand a fortune in warpstone, enough to drown his addiction and elevate himself beyond this pit of squabbling vermin. If he failed, well, he didn't plan to fail. "I will succeed, triumph, great lords," Skritch declared, his tail flicking nervously behind him. "The beasts of Cathay will be yours, yes. Yes. My claws are yours to command." The warlords chittered with approval, their laughter a cacophony of malice. Thras motioned to a waiting warlock engineer who stepped forward, holding a crudely scrawled map of the under-Empire routes that would guide Skritch. "Go, Skritch," Thras growled. "Gather your warbeasts, your chittering horde. Failure will mean death kill, yes, yes." Skritch bowed once more, the weight of his task settling heavily on his shoulders. As he slinked out of the chamber, the warpstone in his pouch called to him, promising fleeting strength and the courage he desperately needed. The journey to Cathay would be long and perilous, but for Skritch Quickfang, warpstone-addict and monster hunter, it was an opportunity to carve his name into the annals of Skaven infamy, or die trying. Chapter 2. Assembly of the Verminous Horde. The fetid tunnels of Skavenblight hummed with activity as Skritch Quickfang made his rounds through the sprawling dens and breeding pits of Clan Moulder. The great expedition to Cathay required more than just his cunning and the vague directions on a warpstone-streaked map. He needed underlings, claws to do the dirty work, paws to die in his place, and minds to amplify his schemes. Skritch strode through the labyrinth of filth and chaos, the warpstone hidden in his pouch buzzing against his ribs, his tail lashed with nervous energy. He had promised the council results, but he needed pawns, no, tools, to see it through. Fortunately, Skavenblight was crawling with vermin eager to gain favor with Clan Moulder, or too afraid to say no. The Seer. His first stop was the cavernous lair of a plague seer, a decrepit old Skaven known as Chalk Fleecite. Chalk was hunched over a bubbling cauldron of noxious green liquid, muttering incoherent incantations. "Chalk, great Chalk Fleecite," Skritch called out, his voice oozing with false reverence. "The council has commanded me to lead a most glorious expedition. Wise, brilliant seer like you must come. Yes, yes." Chalk's milky cataract-covered eyes glinted with suspicion as he turned. "Ha, Skritch Quickfang, warpstone sniffer, calling on me. What need have I of your doomed scheming?" Skritch narrowed his eyes. "Warpstone, yes. Many much warpstone in Cathay, hidden rich lands. You come, and you see, find it first, yes?" He tossed a small shard of warpstone onto the ground, letting its glow entice the seer. Chalk's tail twitched, greed overcoming his doubts. "Fine, yes. I will guide lead, but failure will mean your doom, Teth Skritch." Skritch smirked. One piece down, many to go. The engineers. Next, Skritch made his way to the workshops of the warlock engineers. The air reeked of sulfur and burnt fur, and the sound of grinding gears filled the cavern. Here, Skritch sought out Vic Clanktail, a wiry engineer with an unhealthy obsession with experimental weaponry. Skritch barked, dodging a stray bolt of green lightning that arced from a malfunctioning device. "You come join my expedition, many beasts creatures to test your foul contraptions on." Vic turned, his goggles magnifying his bloodshot eyes. "Creatures, yes. I will come, but I take my doom weapons, yes. Need fodder rats to test, too." Skritch grimaced. "Take what you need, but no more moon than you're worth," he hissed, knowing full well Vic's creations were just as likely to kill his own troops as their enemies. Still, the power they offered was worth the risk. For an expedition this dangerous, Skritch needed the stealth and lethality only the assassins of Clan Eshin could provide. Deep in the shadowy quarters of the Assassin Guild, he found Snick Fangshadow, a lean, wiry killer with a reputation for ruthlessness. "Snick, I have a mission tag for you," Skritch said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Cathay is full of riches, You come join and your blade will taste much blood." Sleeka grinned, his teeth glinting in the dim light. "Rich esprit, yes. I come join but no interference meddling. I kill as I please, yes." Skritch nodded, pretending to agree. Assassins like Snick were unpredictable, but a few well-placed deaths might be just what Skritch needed to keep his underlings in line. The warbeast tanglers and Brakch. Finally, Skritch ventured to the pits where Clan Moulder's most grotesque creations were bred. Here, slavering warbeasts howled and thrashed in their cages, their handlers prodding them with barbed poles. Standing over the largest cage was Reek's Pelchewer, a brutish handler whose face was covered in scars. "Reeks," Skritch called out, his voice cutting through the din. "Your beasts are needed. Your strongest, best." Rick snorted. "My beasts, yes, but not without price. What paleo do you are?" "Hey!" Skritch snapped, stepping closer. "Your reward is survival. Refuse, and I tell the Port Council you horde stock beasts for yourself." Rix's ears flattened and he spat on the ground. "Fine, yes, I come join. But Brakch comes too. Only be strong, smart enough for Cathay's horrors." At the mention of Brakch, Skritch's eyes lit up. The massive rat ogre was unlike any other, bigger, faster, and terrifyingly clever. Brakch loomed in his cage, his glowing eyes fixed on Skritch. The creature's muscles rippled as he growled low, almost as if he understood the conversation. Skritch grinned. Yes, Brakch will do nicely. Keep him obedient, or you will pay, Rix." The army gathers. By the end of the day, Skritch's army began to assemble, a horde of chittering clan rats, snarling warbeasts, shadowy assassins, and mad engineers. At its center stood Brakch, a monstrous figure towering over them all, his heavy chains rattling as handlers struggled to keep him in. Skritch climbed atop a makeshift platform, surveying the motley gathering. "Listen here, vermin. We march to Cathay for glory, riches, and beasts' play. Serve well, and you will feast, gorge on warpstone. Fail, and you will die, suffer in the name of the council." A cacophony of squeals and cheers erupted from the horde. Skritch's tail flicked with satisfaction. The journey would be fraught with peril, but with this army at his back, he would claw his way to triumph or drag them all into oblivion. Chapter 3. A Warpstone Addiction. In the dim glow of his personal quarters, Skritch Quickfang stared at the small shard of warpstone cradled in his clawed palm. Its faint green light pulsed, alive with malevolent energy. He could feel its call, the seductive promise of strength and clarity, of power beyond his mortal limits. His tail lashed the damp stone floor as his thoughts churned. The room was little more than a hollowed-out alcove within the labyrinthine under-Empire tunnels. A crude map of Cathay, stolen from a human merchant caravan years ago, hung on one wall, its edges curling with mildew. The air was thick with the scent of mold and Skaven musk, but none of it mattered to Skritch now. All that mattered was the warpstone. With a hiss, he pressed the shard to his mouth, feeling its unnatural heat on his tongue before swallowing it whole. The change was immediate. His muscles, frail and trembling just moments before, surged with vitality. His eyes, bloodshot and sunken, gleamed with an almost feral intensity. The world sharpened, his senses heightened to an unbearable degree. Every sound, every smell, every flicker of light seemed amplified. Too much, and yet exactly what he craved. He exhaled slowly, his claws flexing. Yes, he muttered, his voice low and throaty. Much better. Strong again, smart, clever. But the euphoria came with its price. Skritch knew that once the effects wore off, the weakness would return, worse than before. Without the warpstone, he was nothing. His limbs would feel like lead, his thoughts sluggish, his body trembling with withdrawal. The council knew this too. It was no accident that they sent a warpstone addict on this expedition. Success would mean a feast of warpstone, failure would mean his doom. Either way, they had ensured his obedience. The toll of addiction. The surge of power coursing through his veins made him feel invincible. But Skritch had learned long ago that such feelings were a lie. He had seen what happened to others who succumbed too deeply to the stone's allure, shriveled husks, gibbering wrecks, or worse, mutated monstrosities that were put down like feral beasts. Skritch's tail flicked nervously as his mind wandered to the surface dwellers he had encountered over the years. Men, elves, even dwarves, he had seen them fight with a determination that no Skaven could muster. They fought for ideals, for loyalty, for something beyond survival. It was baffling, almost laughable. And yet, some small part of him admired it. In the back of his mind, he could hear the voice of a human mercenary he had once spared during a raid, a mistake, surely, but one he hadn't yet regretted. The man had cursed him, even as he bled out, calling him a cowardly rat, a creature without honor. Honor? The word lingered in his thoughts, an alien concept to Skavenkind. Honor didn't fill bellies or secure power. And yet, wasn't it honor that gave humans their strength, their foolishness, their bravery? Skritch shook his head violently, as if trying to dislodge the thought. No, he hissed to himself. Honor is weakness. Strength is survival. Yes, yes, survival. But the seeds of doubt had already been planted. A moment of weakness. The effects of the warpstone began to wane. Skritch stumbled, clutching at the rough stone walls for support as his body convulsed. His claws scraped against the surface, leaving shallow gouges. Pain racked his limbs and his vision blurred. Without warpstone, he felt like a shadow of himself, a weakling, unworthy of survival in Skavenblight's brutal hierarchy. He collapsed onto the floor, panting. The rush of power was gone, leaving behind a hollow void. He hated this, hated the reliance, hated the weakness, hated the council for exploiting it. But most of all, he hated himself for needing it. Doubts and fears. As he lay on the cold stone, his mind wandered again to the expedition. The council's mandate was clear. Capture beasts from Cathay, return with them alive, or not at all. But why risk so much for the council's ambitions? Why not seize the beasts for himself? The thought was treasonous, but it wasn't the first time such thoughts had crossed his mind. Cathay was a land of mystery, a place where humans and other strange creatures lived in relative harmony, building empires of beauty and order. What if he could disappear there? Start anew? The idea was ridiculous, of course. Skaven didn't live among other races, they subjugated them. Still, the idea lingered like a festering wound. He clenched his claws into fists, forcing himself upright. No, he muttered. Weak thoughts, stupid fool thoughts. I am Skaven. I take, steal, kill, destroy. But his words rang hollow in the quiet chamber. Somewhere deep inside, a small part of him, a part he tried desperately to ignore, wondered if there could be more to existence than the endless cycle of treachery and survival. The decision to march. Skritch pushed himself to his feet, his breathing ragged. He stumbled to the small pile of supplies he had gathered, his weapons, his armor, and another precious shard of warpstone. He needed to be strong for what lay ahead. The horde would be ready soon, and with it, his chance at glory, or ruin. He stared at the warpstone shard in his claw, its green glow casting eerie shadows across his face. I am Skritch Quickfang, he whispered to himself, as much a reminder as a declaration. Hunter of beasts, servant of the council, master of my fate. Yes, yes, no one else, no one. With trembling hands, he pocketed the shard and stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The horde awaited, and beyond them, Cathay's uncharted lands. Whatever lay ahead, Skritch would face it, strong or weak, loyal or treacherous, hero or villain. Only time would tell which path he would choose. Chapter 4. Departure through the Under-Empire. The day of departure arrived with little fanfare. In the Under-Empire, triumph was never celebrated until it was assured, and even then, it was rarely celebrated by those who were alive to see it. Skritch Quickfang stood atop a jagged outcrop of stone near the cavernous entrance to the tunnels, surveying his assembled horde. Chittering clan rats squabbled over scraps of fungus and rotting meat, their rusted blades clutched in their filthy claws. Warlock engineers barked commands at their underlings as they tinkered with crude machines that sparked ominously with green lightning. Hulking rat ogres snarled and thrashed at the ends of their chains, held in check by grim-faced handlers armed with barbed poles. At the center of it all loomed Brakch, the massive rat ogre whose glowing eyes scanned the crowd with unnerving intelligence. Skritch's tail flicked with irritation. This was his army, a rabble of scavengers and madmen, held together by little more than fear and greed. Yet it would have to suffice. The Council's mandate had been clear: lead this expedition or perish. "Listen here, you vermin," Skritch called out, his voice echoing through the cavern. The crowd's restless chittering quieted, all eyes turning to their leader. "We march, sneak to glory, to Cathay, rich lands, fat beasts. The Council commands it, and we obey. Yes, yes, follow me or die suffer like weaklings." The assembled horde erupted in squeals and screeches of approval, or perhaps fear. Skritch didn't care which. He turned and gestured sharply to his lieutenants. Chalk Fleesight, the seer, shuffled forward, clutching his staff of twisted wood and bone. Vic Clanktail, the warlock engineer, followed, his wiry frame twitching with excitement. Skritch Quickfang Shadow the assassin melted from the shadows, his yellow eyes glinting. "Move! March!" Skritch barked, and the horde surged forward into the yawning mouth of the Under-Empire's tunnels. The darkness below. The Under-Empire was a labyrinth of twisting passages, vast caverns, and ancient ruins. The tunnels reeked of decay, their walls slick with slime and fungus. Faint green light emanated from veins of warpstone embedded in the stone, casting eerie shadows that seemed to shift and writhe. Skritch led the way, his keen nose twitching as he sniffed for danger. Chalk muttered incoherent incantations under his breath, his staff glowing faintly as he sought to ward off the malevolent spirits said to haunt the tunnels. Behind them, the rest of the horde trudged forward, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Skritch's mind buzzed with tension. The Under-Empire was never truly safe, not even for a war party of this size. Rival clans roamed the tunnels, always eager to sabotage their brethren for a chance at glory. He could feel the eyes watching them from the shadows. Hear the "Stay alert, watch God," Skritch hissed to his lieutenants. "We are not alone, Norna." The ambush. It came without warning. One moment the tunnel ahead was clear. The next, it erupted in a cacophony of screeches and snarls. From the shadows sprang dozens of black-furred Skaven, their weapons gleaming with poison. Clan Eshin assassins, unmistakably so, their sleek forms moving with deadly precision. "Ambush attack! Defend! Defend!" Skritch roared, drawing his twin blades. The tunnel descended into chaos. Clan rats screamed as assassins cut through their ranks, their poisoned blades leaving frothing corpses in their wake. Warbeast handlers struggled to control their charges, and several rat ogres broke free, rampaging indiscriminately through friend and foe alike. Skritch leapt into the fray, his warpstone-enhanced reflexes turning him into a blur of motion. His blades flashed, cutting down 2 assassins before they could land a blow, but for every enemy he felled, another seemed to take their place. Chalk Fleesight raised his staff, chanting a guttural incantation. Green lightning arced from the tip, striking several assassins and leaving their smoldering corpses twitching on the ground. "Coward rats! You face the will of the Council!" Chalk screeched. Nearby, Vic Clanktail activated one of his experimental devices, a sputtering contraption that unleashed a torrent of green fire. The flames engulfed a group of attackers, but the device promptly exploded, taking several of Skritch's own warriors with it. Vic cackled madly, apparently unbothered by the collateral damage. Brakch unleashed. Skritch's keen eyes darted to the center of the melee, where Brakch was still chained, his handlers desperately trying to keep him under control. A snarl of frustration escaped Skritch's lips. They needed the rat ogre in the fight. "Release him, fools!" Skritch shouted, dodging a poisoned blade and impaling its wielder. The handlers hesitated, their fear of Brakch nearly outweighing their fear of Skritch, but a second, more menacing glare from their leader was enough to spur them into action. With trembling claws, they unlocked the rat ogre's chains. Brakch roared, the sound reverberating through the tunnel. He lunged forward, his massive claws swiping through the assassins like they were paper. One assassin leapt at him, but Brakch caught the attacker midair and smashed him into the ground with bone-crushing force. The rat ogre's glowing eyes burned with a feral intelligence, and for a brief moment, Skritch wondered if he would turn on them once the enemy was dead. Victory and rivalries. The ambush dissolved into a rout. The surviving assassins fled into the shadows, their courage broken by the overwhelming ferocity of the horde and Brakch's unrelenting savagery. The tunnel fell silent once more, save for the groans of the wounded and the crackling of green flames still licking at the walls. Skritch stood amid the carnage, his fur matted with blood. His breathing was heavy, his claws trembling, not from exertion, but from the familiar ache of warpstone withdrawal creeping in. He glared at his assembled troops, his voice sharp and commanding. "As what happens when you do not obey, Liston," he snarled, his gaze lingering on the handlers who had hesitated to release Brakch. "We fight together or we die suffering." The handlers cowered, nodding furiously. Skritch turned his attention to Chalk, Vik, and Sneak. The assassins, sent by rivals. The council knows of our power's strength. They fear us, yes, yes. Snake smirked, his tail twitching. Or maybe they doubt leadership, Screeching claws tightened around his blades, but he forced himself to relax. Now wasn't the time to deal with Snick's insolence. "March! No time for delay! Stall! Cathay awaits!" The horde pressed on, their numbers diminished, but their resolve, such as it was, intact. Skritch wiped the blood from his blades and followed, his mind already plotting ways to deal with the challenges ahead. The ambush had tested his leadership, but the true trials were yet to come. Chapter 5. Surface Terrors. The damp, oppressive darkness of the Under-Empire faded behind them, replaced by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through a canopy of skeletal trees. The horde emerged cautiously from the tunnels, their yellow eyes gleaming in the gloom. For many of the Skaven, the surface world was an alien and terrifying place, a realm of open skies and unpredictable dangers. Skritch Quickfang crouched low, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the crisp night air. The scents of wet earth, rotting leaves, and far-off smoke mingled together. But there was something else, a sharper, acrid tang that made his fur bristle. "Deepens," he hissed, his tail flicking sharply. "Close near. Patrols, yes, we must sneak slink or we are all dead killed." His words sent a ripple of nervous chittering through the horde. The Skaven were not built for open combat against human armies. Their strength lay in ambushes, subterfuge, and overwhelming numbers. Here, under the open sky, they were exposed, vulnerable. The human patrol. Skritch motioned for his lieutenants to gather. Chokefleasight shuffled forward, his milky eyes scanning the horizon. Snick Fangshadow melted from the shadows, his lean frame moving with predatory grace. Vic Clunktail fidgeted nervously, one claw resting on a crude, sparking device strapped to his back. "Humans patrol hunt in these lands," Skritch said, his voice low and urgent. "They guard, protect their roads. We must cross without being seen, noticed." Sneak grinned, his teeth glinting in the moonlight. "Killslay patrols, yes, fast and quick, no survivors." Vic shook his head, his whiskers twitching. "Too loud, noisy. Their kind call for help, we would be overrun, swarmed." Choke tapped his staff on the ground, a faint green glow emanating from its tip. "I can summon a foglog. Hide us, yes, but it will not last long." Skritch nodded, his tail swishing thoughtfully. "Do it, Chalk. We move fast, quick, silent, stealthy. Any who fail will be left behind. Yes. A game of stealth." Chalk raised his staff, muttering guttural incantations under his breath. The warpstone embedded in the gnarled wood flared brightly, and a thick, unnatural fog began to seep from the ground, curling around the trees and obscuring the landscape. The horde moved as one, their movement surprisingly quiet for such a large group. Skritch led the way, his keen senses attuned to every sound, every scent. Behind him, Brakch lumbered forward, his massive frame wrapped in tattered cloaks to dull his silhouette. The handlers whispered frantic commands to keep the rat ogre from making noise. The first signs of the patrol came as distant voices, speaking in the guttural tongue of the Empire. The humans were close, too close. Skritch signaled for the horde to halt, pressing himself flat against the ground as the voices grew louder. Through the fog, the patrol emerged, a group of 5 humans, clad in chainmail and carrying lanterns. Their leader, a tall figure with a feathered cap and a well-kept sword, barked orders to his subordinates. They were searching for something or someone. Skritch's claws dug into the soil as he resisted the urge to attack. He could feel the tension radiating from his warriors, their primal instincts crying out for blood. But he knew better. A single scream, a single survivor, and the entire region would swarm with human soldiers. "Wait, Hole," he hissed, his voice barely audible. "Let them pass. No noise sound." The patrol moved closer, the lantern light cutting through the fog. Skritch's heart pounded as one of the humans paused, his head cocked as if listening. For a moment the only sound was the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then the human shook his head and moved on, his boots crunching against the ground. Skritch exhaled slowly as the patrol disappeared into the distance. "No fast now," he whispered harshly, and the horde resumed their march. Reflections on humanity. As they crept through the forest, Skritch's mind wandered to the humans they had just evaded. Their discipline, their courage, it was both baffling and infuriating. Why risk their lives for duty, for honor? What did they gain from such foolishness? He had seen it before, in human towns and cities. They built homes, raised families, fought wars, and died for causes that seemed incomprehensible to Skavenkind. They spoke of loyalty and sacrifice, words that held no meaning in the Under-Empire. And yet, some part of him envied them. Not their honor, no, that was weakness, but their unity, their ability to trust one another, to build something lasting. The Skaven would never have that. Their society was built on treachery and fear, a constant struggle for survival where the weak were devoured by the strong. Skritch shook his head violently, dispelling the thoughts. "Weak thoughts, stupid thoughts," he muttered under his breath. "I am Skaven. We take steel, destroy, destroy. No need for trust or loyalty. No. But the doubt lingered, like a splinter lodged deep in his mind. A narrow escape. As dawn began to break, the horde reached the edge of the forest. The fog was thinning, and the open plains of the Empire stretched out before them. Skritch knew they couldn't linger here. The human patrols would return, and the sunlight would make hiding impossible. He turned to his lieutenants. "We cross-run now. No stopping, no resting. Fast, or we are dead." The horde broke into a ragged sprint, their forms low and hunched as they darted across the open ground. Skritch's heart raced, his claws digging into the earth with each stride. Behind him, Brakch roared softly, his handlers struggling to keep up. By the time they reached the safety of another patch of forest, the first rays of sunlight were cresting the horizon. Skritch allowed himself a brief moment of relief before turning to his army. "Humans are weak, soft," he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "They cannot stop us. No. Cathay is close near. We march." The horde screeched in approval, their spirits bolstered by their narrow escape. But as they disappeared into the shadows of the trees, Skritch couldn't shake the memory of the human patrol, their bravery, their unity. It was a weakness, he told himself again, but a part of him wondered if it might also be their greatest strength. Chapter 6. Into the World's Edge Mountains. The jagged peaks of the World's Edge Mountains loomed before them, their snow-capped summits cutting into the clouds like the fangs of some ancient beast. The air grew colder, the ground harder, and the shadows deeper as Skritch Quickfang led his horde into the treacherous range. The tunnels of the Under-Empire had long since faded behind them, and now they faced the dangers of the surface once more, this time with no promise of escape. Skritch paused at a narrow pass, the wind howling around him and whipping his tattered cloak. The mountains were a death trap, a place where goblins, trolls, and worse things lurked in the darkness. He turned to his lieutenants, their forms huddled against the chill. "Oh, stay close near," Skritch hissed, his breath misting in the cold air. "Mountains are dangerous, deadly. Goblins, trolls, maybe worse. Keep watch, no sleeping." Jock Fleeside clutched his glowing staff tightly, his teeth chattering. "This place is cursed, doomed. Spirits of the dead linger here, yes, yes." "Spirits or not, we move fast, quick," Skritch snapped. "No stopping, no resting. Weaklings will be left behind." The goblin horde. It didn't take long for the mountains to test them. As the horde wound its way through a narrow ravine, the chittering of goblins echoed from the cliffs above. Skritch's ears twitched, his claws gripping the hilts of his blades. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the scrape of metal and the guttural growls of squigs. "Dumb of the combatants," he hissed. "Ambushish attack. Ready, ready." The first wave came from above, jagged rocks tumbling down the cliffs as goblins screamed war cries and leapt into the fray. Clanrats scattered in panic, their shrieks blending with the goblins' cackles. Squigs, hulking, slavering beasts, bounded into the horde, their massive jaws snapping up unfortunate Skaven whole. Skritch darted through the chaos, his warpstone-enhanced speed turning him into a blur. He gutted a goblin mid-leap, its lifeless body crumpling to the ground. Behind him, Chalk unleashed a blast of green lightning, frying a cluster of attackers. Vic Clanktail's contraptions sputtered and spat fire, incinerating a squig. But "Hold, hold," Skritch roared, slashing at another goblin. "Do not break run, fight or die." Brakch unleashed. As the battle raged, a group of squigs broke through the lines, charging toward the handlers struggling to control Brakch. The massive rat ogre snarled, his glowing eyes narrowing as the squigs approached. His chains rattled, his muscles straining against the handler's desperate grip. "Brakch, release in," Skritch shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "Brakch, kill, destroy." With trembling claws, the handlers obeyed. The chains fell away and Brakch roared, his massive frame lunging into the fray. His claws tore through goblins like paper, his fists crushing squigs with bone-shattering force. One particularly large squig lunged at him, but Brakch caught it mid-air, his jaws snapping shut on its neck with a sickening crunch. The tide began to turn. Emboldened by Brakch's savagery, the horde rallied, cutting down the remaining goblins and driving the survivors into retreat. The ravine fell silent once more, save for the ragged breathing of the Skaven and the soft crunch of snow underfoot. Rocks growing independence. Skritch approached Brakch cautiously, his blades still drawn. The rat ogre stood amid the carnage, his chest heaving, his eyes glowing with a strange, unsettling intelligence. He turned his gaze to Skritch, his expression almost— "Ganango Brakch," Skritch said, forcing a grin. "You fight well, yes, yes. Stronger than goblins, smarter too." Brakch growled low, his gaze lingering on Skritch for a moment longer than the warlord liked. Skritch's tail twitched nervously. Brakch was unlike any other rat ogre he had encountered, stronger, faster, and, most troubling of all, smarter. If the beast ever decided to turn on him, there was little Skritch could do to stop him. "Chain him again now!" Skritch barked to the handlers, his voice sharp. The handlers hesitated but quickly obeyed, securing Brakch's chains once more. The rat ogre didn't resist, but his eyes remained fixed on Skritch, a silent challenge lingering in their depths. Natural hazards. The goblins weren't the only threat the mountains had in store. As the horde pressed on, the terrain grew more treacherous. Loose rocks tumbled beneath their feet, and icy winds howled through narrow passes, threatening to sweep the smaller Skave off the cliffs. At one point, a sudden rockslide forced the horde to scramble for cover. Several clan rats were buried alive, their screams quickly silenced by the weight of the debris. Skritch cursed under his breath, his claws digging into the frozen ground as he climbed over the rubble. "We fools," he snarled. "Keep moving. No time for morning crying." The horde pressed on, their numbers dwindling as the mountains claimed their toll. Skritch's own nerves began to fray, the cold biting into his bones and his warpstone reserves running dangerously low. He could feel the familiar ache of withdrawal creeping in, his limbs growing heavy, his thoughts sluggish. A moment of respite. As night fell, the horde found shelter in a shallow cave, its walls lined with ancient carvings that spoke of long-forgotten dwarven clans. Skritch crouched by a small fire, the flickering light casting shadows across his gaunt features. He clutched a shard of warpstone in his claw, hesitating before pressing it to his mouth. The familiar rush hit him like a lightning bolt, his strength returning in a surge of raw energy. But as the euphoria faded, his thoughts turned once more to Brakch. The rat ogre had saved them today, but his growing independence was a threat Skritch couldn't ignore. "Brakch fights well, yes, Chalk said, his milky eyes glinting in the firelight. "But he thinks too much. Dangerous, yes." Skritch nodded slowly, his tail flicking. "He is tool weapon, nothing more. If he forgets that, I will remind him." Chalk chuckled darkly, his laughter echoing in the cold, silent cave. Skritch turned his gaze to the horde, their forms huddled together for warmth. The mountains had tested them, and more trials awaited, but for now they would rest. Cathay was still far away, and the path ahead promised only more bloodshed, but Skritch Quickfang was determined to see it through, whatever the cost. Chapter 7. An Alliance of Convenience. The frost-covered path twisted through the jagged peaks of the World's Edge Mountains, each step bringing Skritch Quickfang's ragged horde closer to Cathay. The chill bit through fur and flesh alike, and morale had begun to fray at the edges. Skritch himself, shrouded in his tattered cloak, felt the creeping ache of warpstone withdrawal clawing at his nerves. He clutched a small shard of the glowing stone in his claw, fighting the urge to use it. Not yet, he told himself, not until absolutely necessary. The wind shifted, carrying with it an unsettling sound, guttural laughter, accompanied by the heavy thud of massive footsteps. Skritch's ears twitched, his tail flicking sharply. He raised a claw to halt the column. "Quiet silence," he hissed. "Something big lance comes." The horde froze, their chittering falling silent. Skritch crept forward, his keen eyes scanning the rocky pass ahead. As he rounded a bend, the source of the noise came into view, a band of ogres, their hulking forms casting long shadows in the dim light. They were a motley group, clad in patchwork armor and wielding massive clubs and cleavers. At their center stood a towering brute with a crude iron helmet and a gut plate adorned with skulls. The ogres had spotted them. "Rats," the lead ogre bellowed, his voice echoing off the cliffs. His companions burst into laughter, their beady eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "What's this, lads? A walking feast, eh?" Skritch's mind raced. Fighting ogres head-on was suicide, even with Brakch and the war machines. But perhaps there was another way. The negotiation. Skritch stepped forward, raising his claws in a gesture of submission. "Wait, halt. No fighting, no killing. We come to talk speak. Yes." The lead ogre snorted, his grin revealing yellowed teeth. "Talk? You? Ha! What's a rat got to say worth listening to, eh?" Much," Skritch said quickly, his voice oily with false confidence. "We have treasure riches, yes, warpstone, bright green, worth much to ogres, yes?" At the mention of warpstone, the ogre's grin faded, replaced by a glint of interest. He leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Skritch. "Warpstone, eh? The shiny stuff what burns and glows? You got that, little rat?" Skritch nodded eagerly. Yes, much warpstone, hidden, safe. We share split, but only if you help aid us. Protect our horde, kill our enemies." The ogre scratched his chin, his thick fingers leaving streaks of grime. You're saying we smash things for you, and we get the shiny rocks?" "Yes, Pepet," Skritch said, seizing the opportunity. "Many enemies in mountains, humans, goblins, trolls. We fight together, crush, smash all." The ogres muttered among themselves, their deep voices rumbling like distant thunder. Finally, the leader turned back to Skritch, his grin returning. "All right, Rat, you got yourself a deal," he said, extending a massive hand. "Name's Bog Klesh Crusher. We fight with you, but if you try any funny business, well, we'll be eating rat stew for weeks." Skritch suppressed a shudder and clasped the ogre's hand, his claws barely wrapping around the brute's fingers. "Delia, yes. Yes." The grueling partnership. The newly formed alliance was as uneasy as it was necessary. Bog and his warband stomped along with the Skaven horde, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. The ogres were crude, brutish, and insatiably hungry, constantly demanding food and entertainment. Skritch begrudgingly sacrificed several clan rats to keep their appetites in check, much to the dismay of the horde. Bog, however, proved his worth almost immediately. When a troll ambush threatened to overwhelm the Skaven, the ogres waded into battle with terrifying ferocity. Bog himself crushed one troll's skull with a single swing of his club, while his companions tore through the rest like a pack of wolves. The Skaven, emboldened by the display, rallied and drove off the remaining creatures. Watching the carnage, Skritch couldn't help but admire the ogre's raw power. Bog, in particular, seemed unstoppable, a mountain of muscle and brutality. But with that power came a danger Skritch couldn't ignore. The ogres were loyal only as long as their greed was fed. If the warpstone ran out, or if they sensed weakness, the alliance would turn to bloodshed in an instant. Brakch and Bog. Tensions rose when Brakch and Bog crossed paths. The rat ogre, ever watchful, growled low as the ogre leader approached. Bog grinned, his massive cleaver resting on his shoulder. "That's a big beastie you got there," Bog said, his tone equal parts admiration and challenge. "Bet he'd make a good fight." Skritch stepped between them, his heart pounding. No fight. Brakch is weapon tool, not for games, no." Bog chuckled, but his gaze lingered on Brakch. "Don't get your tail in a twist, Rat. Just admiring the beast. Still, if he ever gets bored of following you, we'd be happy to take him off your claws." Skritch forced a laugh, though his fur bristled. "Brakch follows only me. Loyal, yes. As Bog moved on, Skritch turned to Brakch, who was still watching the ogre with narrowed eyes. For the first time, Skritch felt a pang of unease. The ogres were a danger, but Brakch was something else entirely. Marching toward Cathay. With the ogres in tow, the horde pressed on through the mountains. The alliance brought both strength and strain, the tension between the two groups palpable. Skritch knew the arrangement was temporary, a fragile truce held together by promises of warpstone and mutual necessity, but for now, it was enough. As the peaks of the World's Edge Mountains began to give way to the sprawling plains of the Darklands, Skritch allowed himself a rare moment of hope. The journey to Cathay was far from over, and the dangers ahead would be greater than anything they had yet faced. But with the strength of the ogres and the cunning of the Skaven, perhaps they would survive. For now, survival was enough. Chapter 8. The Threat of Chaos. The jagged peaks of the World's Edge Mountains faded into the horizon as the Skaven horde descended into the arid ash-strewn expanse of the Darklands. The landscape was lifeless, a sprawling wasteland littered with cracked earth and the remnants of long-dead civilizations. Skritch Quickfang trudged at the head of the column, his senses on high alert. The Darklands were dangerous, even for a horde of Skaven bolstered by a band of ogres. The wind carried a foul stench, burnt flesh and metal, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of chaos. Skritch froze, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. "Stop, halt," he barked, raising a claw. "Danger, yes, yes. Chaos comes." The horde hesitated, their chittering voices rising in panic. Even the ogres, who rarely showed fear, exchanged uneasy glances. Bog Kleshcrusher, the ogre leader, lumbered forward, his massive club resting on his shoulder. "Chaos?" Bog grunted, squinting at the horizon. "You sure, rat?" Skritch nodded, his fur bristling. "Yes, yes. Smell it, hear it. They come. Soon?" The arrival of chaos. The Chaos Warband appeared as if conjured from the shadows. Hulking warriors in jagged, blood-slicked armor marched in formation, their twisted banners flapping in the wind. At their head strode a massive Chaos champion, his horned helm gleaming with unholy light. Behind them came mutated beasts and gibbering horrors, their forms grotesque and alien. The Chaos warriors let out a guttural roar, their voices shaking the ground. The warband charged, their weapons raised high, their eyes blazing with the fires of the dark gods. "Blight kill!" Skritch screamed, drawing his twin blades. "Hold, or we die, suffer!" The horde erupted into chaos, the clan rats surging forward in a tide of squealing bodies. The ogres bellowed war cries, their massive weapons swinging in wide arcs as they waded into the fray. Brakch roared, snapping his chains as he barreled toward the enemy, his claws tearing through the first wave of chaos beasts. But the Chaos Warband was relentless. Their warriors carved through the Skaven ranks with terrifying ease, their every movement fueled by dark purpose. For every Chaos warrior that fell, a dozen Skaven lay dead, their blood soaking the cracked earth. Skritch's desperate. Skritch darted through the carnage, his blades flashing as he cut down a pair of mutated horrors. His heart pounded, his mind racing. The Chaos warriors were too strong, their will too unyielding. His horde was faltering, their fear overwhelming their loyalty. Even the ogres, mighty as they were, couldn't hold the line for long. Desperation clawed at Skritch's mind. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a shard of warpstone, its green light pulsing with malevolent energy. He hesitated, his claws trembling. He had already consumed too much in recent days. Another dose could push him over the edge, or worse. But there was no choice. With a hiss, Skritch pressed the warpstone to his mouth, swallowing it whole. The effect was instantaneous. His body surged with power, his muscles swelling, his senses sharpening to a razor's edge. He felt unstoppable, a god among vermin. "Karak. Kill, destroy!" Skritch roared, his voice reverberating unnaturally. He launched himself into the fray, a blur of motion as his blades tore through Chaos warriors with impossible speed. His strikes left trails of green light, and his enemies fell like wheat before a scythe. The tide began to turn. Emboldened by Skritch's display, the horde rallied, their fear giving way to frenzied determination. Brakch, too, fought with renewed fury, his claws rending armor and flesh alike. Even Bog and the ogres seemed invigorated, their heavy blows crushing Chaos warriors underfoot. The personal cost. But the power came with a price. Skritch's heart raced uncontrollably, his vision blurring as the warpstone burned through his veins. His body trembled, his movements growing erratic. He felt as if his very soul were being devoured, consumed by the stone's insatiable hunger. He struck down another Chaos warrior, but the effort left him staggering. His claws trembled and blood dripped from his nose and ears. He knew he couldn't keep this up for long. The Chaos champion, sensing weakness, turned his attention to Skritch. The towering warrior bellowed a challenge, raising his massive axe as he charged. Skritch barely managed to dodge the first strike, the axe carving a deep trench in the ground where he had stood. The champion pressed the attack, his strikes relentless. Skritch fought desperately, his enhanced speed and reflexes barely keeping him alive, but each swing of the champion's axe grew closer, each dodge more labored. In a final, desperate move, Skritch feigned a stumble, luring the champion into overextending. As the axe came down, Skritch surged forward, his blades driving deep into the warrior's chest. The champion let out a guttural roar, his body convulsing before collapsing in a heap. Aftermath. With their leader dead, the Chaos Warband faltered. The remaining warriors fought with diminished fervor, and the horde capitalized on their weakness. One by one, the Chaos Warriors fell, until only the corpses remained. The battlefield was silent, save for the groans of the wounded and the crackle of green flames licking at the edges of the carnage. Skritch stood in the center, his body trembling, his fur matted with blood. The warpstone's effects were fading, leaving him weak and hollow. Bog lumbered over, his massive form looming above Skritch. "You're a mad one, rat," the ogre rumbled, a hint of respect in his tone. "But you fight good." Skritch forced a grin, though his vision swam. "Good fight, yes, yes. We win. Triumph." But as he turned to survey the remnants of his horde, his grin faltered. Their numbers were drastically reduced, their morale fragile. The cost of victory had been high, too high, and Skritch himself could feel the toll the warpstone had taken on his body. He wouldn't survive another battle like this. Cathay was still far away, and the dangers ahead were only growing, but for now, they had survived. Skritch only hoped it would be enough. Chapter 9. The Secrets of Karak. The dark lands stretched endlessly behind them, as the horde entered a shadowed valley nestled between jagged cliffs. The path had narrowed, forcing the group into a tight column. Skritch Quickfang stalked at the front, his claws twitching with tension. The air here was heavy, thick with the weight of something ancient and unseen. "Something strange wrong here," muttered Chalk Fleshite, his milky eyes scanning the gloom. His staff glowed faintly with green light, casting eerie shadows on the cracked stone walls. Old power, yes, yes. Dwarfen ruins, maybe. Skritch's ears twitched. Dwarfs? Here? Ha! Dwarfs are dead gone. All things belong to us now. But even as he spoke, the sight ahead silenced his bravado. Rising from the valley floor was the crumbled silhouette of a great fortress. Its walls, once a testament to dwarven craftsmanship, were now blackened and fractured. Massive statues of long-dead kings flanked the entrance, their faces eroded by time. Above the great archway, runes faintly glimmered with a pale blue light. "Karak," Chalk whispered. "A fallen hold, lost to time." The name sent ripples of unease through the horde. The dwarfs were long-time enemies of the Skaven, and their fortresses were legendary for their traps and defenses. But Karak seemed lifeless, its gates open like the maw of some great beast. "Keep moving, yes, yes," Skritch barked, his tail lashing. "We search for anything useful. No stopping, no coward fear." The haunted depths. Inside the gates, the air grew colder, the silence oppressive. The horde crept cautiously through massive halls lined with broken columns and shattered statues. The walls bore intricate carvings, telling the story of Karak's rise and fall. Skritch ignored them, his focus on finding anything of value, treasure, supplies, or warpstone. Choke, however, lingered by one of the carvings, his eyes narrowing. "Look, see," he rasped, pointing with his clawed hand. "Beasts, great and strange, myth creatures of Cathay." Skritch turned, his gaze following Choke's pointing claw. The carving depicted a group of dwarves battling a serpentine beast with golden scales, its jaws wide enough to swallow a warrior whole. Nearby, a great bird with fiery wings soared above a forest, its talons clutching a dwarven war machine. "These beasts real? Yes, yes," Skritch asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Chalk nodded, his voice reverent. "Real. legends of Cathay, Kirin, Fangguang, and more. Powerful, yes, dangerous, but if captured, great prizes. Skritch's tail flicked with excitement. This was what they needed, a purpose beyond mere survival. If they could capture one of these mythical beasts, their glory in Clan Moulder would be unmatched. The spectral guardians. The horde pressed deeper into the fortress, their path lit only by the faint glow of warpstone lanterns. The air grew heavier, charged with a strange energy that made the fur on their necks stand on end. Suddenly, a shriek echoed through the halls, followed by the chittering of panicked clan rats. Skritch spun around, his claws gripping his blades. From the shadows emerged spectral forms, dwarven warriors, their ghostly bodies clad in ancient armor. Their faces were twisted in eternal rage, their eyes glowing with an unearthly light. "Ghosts," Choke screeched. "Guardians of the hold!" The spectral dwarfs charged, their ghostly axes passing through the bodies of clan rats with deadly precision. The struck rats collapsed, their lifeless forms crumpling as their spirits were torn away. "Fight, fight," Skritch roared. "They are nothing. No match for us." The horde surged forward, their weapons striking at the spectral forms, but the ghosts were impervious to physical blows. Panic spread through the ranks as more Skaven fell, their spirits wrenched from their bodies. "Choke's magic." "Only magic can banish them," Choke shouted, raising his staff. The warpstone embedded in its tip flared brightly, casting a sickly green light across the room. He began chanting in a guttural tongue, the words dripping with power. A blast of green lightning erupted from the staff, striking one of the spectral dwarfs. The ghost let out an unearthly wail before dissolving into wisps of smoke. Encouraged, Choke continued his incantations, targeting the ghosts one by one. "Protect the seer," Skritch ordered, leaping into the fray. He dodged the spectral axes, his warpstone-enhanced speed allowing him to stay ahead of their strikes. Around him the horde rallied, forming a defensive ring around Choke. As Choke's magic banished the last of the spectral dwarfs, the fortress fell silent once more. The horde stood panting, their numbers reduced, but their spirits lifted by their survival. Lore. Choke approached a large stone altar at the center of the hall, its surface inscribed with glowing runes. He placed a clawed hand on the stone, his eyes rolling back as he muttered incoherent words. "What do you see, Learn?" Skritch demanded, stepping closer. Choke's voice was distant, almost reverent. The dwarfs knew of Cathay's beasts, yes. They sought to capture them, but failed. These creatures are powerful, ancient. To control one would be to hold great power. Skritch's eyes gleamed with ambition. "Good, yes. We will do what dwarfs could not. We are better. Smonger, smarter." Choke hesitated, his gaze lingering on the altar. "But beware, warlord. These beasts are not mere prey. They are tied to Cathay's magic, its gods. To hunt them is to invite their wrath." Skritch bared his teeth in a wicked grin. "Wrath means nothing. Power is everything." Reignited purpose. The horde left Karak behind, its spectral guardians vanquished but its secrets unlocked. Skritch's mind buzzed with plans. The mythical beasts of Cathay were no longer just stories. They were real, tangible prizes waiting to be claimed. With one of them in his claws, he could ascend to unimaginable power within Clan Moulder. But as the dark land stretched before them, Skritch couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and malevolent was watching. The ghosts of Karak were gone, but their warning lingered. "March fast, Quickinen," he commanded, his voice sharp. "Cathay awaits. No stopping, no weakness." The horde chittered in reluctant agreement, their steps quickening as they left the cursed hold behind. The path ahead was dangerous, but Skritch Quickfang had never been more certain of his purpose. He would claim the beasts of Cathay or die trying. Chapter 10. The Blasted Wastes. The air grew thick and acrid as the Skaven horde descended into the heart of the Darklands. Here the ground was blackened and cracked, veins of molten rock glowing faintly beneath the surface. Plumes of ash and smoke rose from distant fissures, blotting out the sun and casting the landscape in an eerie, perpetual twilight. Skritch Quickfang pulled his ragged cloak tighter against the choking air, his nose twitching in disgust. The Darklands were inhospitable even by Skaven standards, a desolate realm where only the strongest or most cunning survived. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, and every step risked sinking into a pool of boiling mud or triggering a collapse of the unstable ground. "Eat close together," Skritch barked to his lieutenants. "This place eats, kills fools who stray." Choke Fleecite shuffled beside him, his staff glowing faintly with warpstone light. "The land is alive, yes, yes," the seer muttered, his milky eyes scanning the horizon. "Cursed, doomed, tainted by chaos. We should not be here." "Yet here we are," Skritch snapped. "Keep your spells ready, prepared. I smell danger." The first attack. They hadn't traveled far when the ground beneath them began to tremble. A low, guttural growl echoed across the wastes, and the horde froze, their eyes darting nervously. "No!" Sneaks Out Shadow hissed, his daggers drawn. The answer came in the form of a hulking monstrosity that burst from the ground ahead. Its form was a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and rock, its limbs warped and uneven, its eyes glowing with a sickly green light. The creature roared, exposing a mouth lined with jagged, mismatched teeth. "Chaos spawn!" Choke shrieked. "A beast of mutation!" The chaos spawn lunged at the horde, its misshapen limbs swinging wildly. Clan rats scattered in every direction, squealing in terror as the creature smashed into their ranks, crushing several underfoot. "Old fools!" Skritch shouted, his tail lashing. "Surrounded! Attack from all sides!" But the chaos spawn was relentless. Every time a Skaven struck it, the creature seemed to adapt, its twisted flesh knitting itself back together. Even Brakch, who charged into the fray with a roar, found himself struggling against the beast's raw strength. Desperate measures. Skritch knew they couldn't fight the chaos spawn head-on. The horde was already stretched thin, their morale fragile after the battles with goblins and chaos warriors. He needed a plan, and fast. "Bricure!" Skritch called out, spotting the warlock engineer fumbling with one of his contraptions. "What weapons do you have?" Big Cranktail's whiskers twitched nervously. "Doomed him, yes, not stable safe, but big boom." "Then use it," Skritch snapped. "Kill, destroy the beast, or I feed you to it." Vicky hesitated, but the look in Skritch's eyes brooked no argument. The warlock engineer pulled a small, sparking device from his pack, a crude bomb wrapped in wires and pulsating with warpstone energy. With trembling claws, he activated the device and hurled it toward the chaos spawn. The explosion was deafening, a blast of green fire and shrapnel that lit up the desolate landscape. The chaos spawn let out a final, tortured roar before collapsing into a smoldering heap. The horde erupted into nervous cheers, though many kept their distance from the smoking remains. "Say, victory, yes, yes," Skritch declared, stepping forward and raising his blades. "Follow me, and we survive triumph." The cheers grew louder, though Skritch could see the fear in their eyes. The Darklands were testing them, and the worst was yet to come. The wastes fight back. The horde pressed on, but the dangers of the Darklands grew more insidious. Rivers of molten rock blocked their path, forcing them to take treacherous detours through crumbling cliffs and narrow ravines. The air itself seemed hostile, filled with ash that stung their eyes and burned their lungs. At night the mutant beasts came, serpentine creatures with too many limbs, swarms of flying abominations with razor-sharp wings, and others too grotesque to describe. Each attack sapped the horde's strength, their numbers dwindling as the weakest fell. Even Brakch, the seemingly unstoppable rat ogre, began to show signs of strain. His once mighty roars grew hoarse, his movements sluggish. Skritch watched him closely, his mind torn between admiration and fear. If Brakch faltered, the horde's morale would collapse completely. A moment of cunning. One night, as the horde camped in the shadow of a massive volcanic spire, Skritch gathered his lieutenants to discuss their next move. A large pack of mutant monstrosities had been stalking them for hours, their glowing eyes visible in the distance. "We cannot fight them all," Shulk said, his voice grim. "Too many, yes. We die suffer if they attack." "And we don't fight," Skritch said, a sly grin spreading across his face. "We fool them." The others exchanged wary glances, but Skritch pressed on. "Lure them into trap. Use the land against them. They are beasts, stupid, dumb." With Bog's help, the ogres and Skaven worked quickly, digging a series of shallow pits and filling them with volatile warpstone shards. When the mutant pack finally attacked, they charged headlong into the traps, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that reduced them to ash. The horde let out a collective sigh of relief, though their exhaustion was evident. Skritch, however, felt a flicker of pride. Cunning and desperation had won the day once again. Renewed resolve. As dawn broke over the smoldering wasteland, Skritch stood atop a rocky outcrop, surveying the battered remnants of his horde. Their journey through the Darklands had been costly, but they were still alive, and each step brought them closer to Cathay. "We are stronger, yes, Skritch declared, his voice carrying over the crowd. "The Darklands cannot kill us. We are Skaven. We are survivors." The horde chittered in agreement, their spirits lifting ever so slightly. Skritch allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but his mind was already turning to the challenges ahead. The Darklands had tested them, but Cathay promised far greater rewards and far greater dangers. For now, though, they would march on, driven by desperation, ambition, and the faint glimmer of hope that something better lay beyond the ash and fire.